everyone, I hope you're all well. Today I just wanted to sit down and have a bit of a catch up with you all because it feels like it's been a while since I actually just sat down and talked about books with you, and I've recently read some good ones that I'm excited to talk to you about. But I also just wanted to share some of my current reads, some of my local favourites and places that I've enjoyed going to, including a new favourite bookshop. It has been an absolutely miserable day in Yorkshire. It's been constant grey cloud and just rain. I do tend to like those days best though. I am partial to them just because they're like the perfect excuse days to like not actually go out and not do anything apart from read or just stay inside, and staying inside is my favourite place to be a lot of the time. But I feel like the weather's been really weird this summer. I was in London recently and it was like the most stereotypically British day in the way that it was like torrential rain, and then within like 5-10 minutes like glorious blue skies and sunshine. And I feel like the weather's giving us whiplash at the moment, and so I kind of wanted to brighten up what was becoming a little bit of a miserable day on multiple counts and sit down and cheer myself up by talking about books with you. I know at the end of my videos I always often do like an emoji as like an audience participation thing, as a way of saying hi to us, but I was actually wondering if today at the beginning of the video I would love to know what the weather is currently like. When we don't know what to talk about, weather never fails us. So let me know what the weather is like where you are currently, because I know that people come to my videos months after. So you could be watching this in the middle of a heat wave, or it could be the weather like where I am now, which is just constant rain. I feel like that is probably the most stereotypically British way I could have ever started a video. But we have had some really beautiful days in York so far, with gorgeous sunshine. I've been able to wear my summer dresses and my hats, so it's not all kind of doom and gloom. And I do feel like, in fact, we got caught in a really horrific like thunderstorm in the centre of York, and the Minster just looked so gothic, and then it was followed by double rainbows, so it's actually kind of epic. And I do sometimes feel like when you have kind of gothic architecture, you have St Mary's Abbey, it looks brilliant in, you know, the sunshine, but it also looks really cool with like really dark clouds behind it, and then you can kind of think it's kind of like Dracula-esque. But we have had some really beautiful days, and we have been able to get outside and enjoy and explore a little bit more of North Yorkshire. My big thing for this, well, I say my big thing for this year is to explore North Yorkshire, but I am probably going to be in North Yorkshire for a really long time. But I have wanted to explore some of the places that we couldn't do when we lived here, mainly because we didn't have a car, and now we do have a car. It really opens up doors to us in terms of where we can get to and the different parts of the countryside that just wouldn't be quite as accessible if we didn't have a car. The first place I wanted to mention was Malton, which is a historic market town in Yorkshire, and I've never been to Malton, and it is really famous for its food festivals. They actually have like a piece of street art, or like a mural for Yorkshire pudding, for a Yorkshire pudding recipe, and Yorkshire puddings are one of my favourite foods. I love a roast dinner, and they have it like a Yorkshire pudding recipe on the wall, which is just kind of iconic. Personally, if I could have a Yorkshire pudding recipe on the side of my house, if my house wasn't a mid-terrace, I totally would do. Ben and I are definitely going to go back to Malton when it's a little bit more open, especially because Ben is a foodie. But I have to say, I have now discovered a new favourite bookshop ever, I think, and it is Kemps bookshop in Malton. So there is like the Kemps bookshop and general store. So half of the store is this really just beautiful giftery, I guess, with loads of things from Yorkshire, all local kind of like candles, bath things, just everything, just so many beautiful giftery things that feel really special and unique to the area. And then you also have the bookshop at the side of it, and that is just my favourite type of shop. Like, I've always loved kind of gift shops and just things you can discover really special little things, especially local to the area, because that's something that I just really like finding, especially when I'm giving gifts to people, getting something made from Yorkshire heather or Yorkshire honey or something like that feels really nice. But this bookshop is also just so beautiful and calm, and it's exactly how I would decorate a bookshop of my own. Like, it has kind of little nooks where you can go and sit and read, and little chairs everywhere, and it's a really nice curated section as well. We actually went during Independent Bookshop Week, which is one of the reasons I went, but then I never actually filmed it, so I wanted to make sure that I included this bookshop in a video because it was just one of the best bookshops I've actually been to in a really long time. The booksellers were lovely. There were so many lovely things that they had picked out local to the area as well. So a book that Ben actually picked up was a book on prehistoric Yorkshire, which is one of Ben's kind of main interests in history, and it was by a local independent publishing company, a local author, and it includes kind of places where we can go to kind of find remnants, I guess, of that history. It really picks up on some of kind of the lost history of the area that you wouldn't necessarily know is there or is the context to different parts of Yorkshire. So I think Ben is definitely planning a few day trips where we can kind of use this book almost like a map to kind of go and find history in. And so it has so much kind of relevant, I think, to both of our interests. The fiction section is also wonderful, and it's got a really lovely children's section as well. And I ended up picking up 2 books there, and one of them was directly inspired by the other one, so I thought I would share it with you now. So as I said, Kemps had a lot of fiction, non-fiction about the local area, as well as kind of gifts, and I saw Yorkshire, a Literary Landscape, an anthology, edited by Stuart Davies, and it's published by Macmillan. And I obviously have read pieces of Yorkshire literature before, mainly because I've read the Brontes and Dracula, which was like inspired by Whitby. But apart from that, I haven't really read much. The book also has a really lovely mix of fiction, non-fiction, biography, and also poetry. And so I'm really excited to use this book to almost guide my exploration of Yorkshire. There are places in Yorkshire that I'm more familiar with, places around York a little bit more familiar with. My family are from Hull, so my nana's from Hull, so I have family kind of more in the East Riding. Scarborough, we had family friends, I've been there a lot, and a lot of my childhood kind of holidays we did in kind of the Yorkshire Dales, Asquith, Wensleydale, that kind of area. And so I'm just excited to kind of tick off all these different places. Ben and I did a really fun holiday. Our first ever holiday together actually was, I think, a week or 2 weeks, where we rented a car and just went all across Yorkshire, and it was just the best time. So I think now we live here, we'll definitely do more of that. But I wanted to use this book as a way to just open my mind to which books I could read. I am notorious with anthologies that I almost use the book as a stepping stone, so I like to read sections. I don't even read the whole segments that are included in it. If I start reading it and then I'm interested in it, I will just then go and read the full book. When I was standing around and reading this book in the shop, it directly inspired me to buy my next read, which I've only just finished and really enjoyed. And that is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. When I was a little girl, I was obsessed with the movie of this book, but I never read it as a child because I think I was a little bit too precocious, and God forbid a child reads a children's book, even though the way in the time of writing this in kind of the early 20th century, children's literature was viewed so much more differently than it is viewed now, and was designed as much for adults as it was for children. I was just a bit weirdly snobbish about reading children's books as a child, and so I never read it. And I also didn't realise until I picked up this book that it was actually set in Yorkshire. I don't know why I just didn't pick that up from the film. Maybe, I guess the last time I actually watched the film was so long ago that I wouldn't have maybe made the connection. So I actually do need to rewatch that film because it is one of my kind of all-time favourites. I really enjoyed reading this, really looking out for Yorkshire in this novel, which becomes, in the same way that the Secret Garden is another character, Yorkshire itself and the moors is also another character. Obviously you also have a lot of Yorkshire dialect in this book as well, but some of the descriptions of like the wind wuthering, I just loved, because I think we've all been, especially if it's like an old house or something, where like the wind is coming off the moors and the idea of it wuthering, like shaking, you can really feel, and I did really enjoy that. One thing I have to say, I think if you were going to read this with a child, I think you need to have the conversations around colonialism and racism. This book is incredibly, but it was hard to read because of the descriptions of racism. The racial slurs in this book are really used by the author in a way to make the main character even more unlikable, and it would be a really interesting book to kind of study from that perspective, because actually I never studied any children's literature at university. I never chose that course, and it is a really complicated book, I think, when you're kind of looking at it from that perspective, and it is really important to kind of break it down and critique it and challenge it. I think especially if you were reading it with children, I think reading it as an adult feels quite complicated. And I think it is also interesting because the main character of Mary, she's just not a very nice person, and I think that is really lovely to see her change and grow, but to have such racism as a part of that, as a tool, really is just uncomfortable, I think, from a modern reader, even though so many of those attitudes are still unfortunately relevant in society today, as we've seen from recent elections. But anyway, the whole novel is about the healing power of nature, but also the importance of nurturing someone. In the same way that you would nurture flowers and it will thrive, it's the same with humanity and children. And to see the growth of these characters as the garden grow was really lovely to see. There are some really lovely quotes in this book, and in fact one of them is actually on the back of this beautiful Wordsworth classic edition. "Where you tend a rose, my lad, a thistle cannot grow," which I think sums up the book perfectly. And there are lots of quotes actually that I would love to write in a commonplace book or something, because they're definitely ones that I'll return to, especially when I think I'm at a stage in my life where I really needed to kind of, water my ground, allow myself to blossom where I'm planted, kind of thing. So I've really taken a lot more from the book than I thought I would do. And also at the same time I was reading this book, I got a housewarming gift from work, which was a rose, and roses are my favourite flowers, even though Sybil does eat them, so we can't have them indoors anymore, so we have it outdoors. But just as I was reading this, we were planting this rose in really not great conditions because of the state our little garden is in. We do actually have a courtyard garden, and I was like, if this rose can grow here, it can grow anywhere. And when I finished reading, we had this one little rose that had bloomed, and it felt just like such a symbol. But now, also after reading this, now I just want to garden. I want to have a garden, I want to have wildflowers, I want to have roses and rose bushes everywhere. I also spent hours reading this in both the Treasurer's Garden and also the York Art Gallery garden, which is like an edible garden, and near there's also a wildflower meadow that they've put up for the Monet in York exhibition, which was just kind of perfect because when I was reading this we also had really beautiful weather, and the wildflowers at the art gallery are just so beautiful. I would love to have wildflowers in a planter. That's what my mum does, and she tends it and it looks just really colourful and beautiful. And so I had many kind of early afternoons and lunch times sitting reading The Secret Garden in the art gallery garden and just surrounded by wildflowers, and it just made me want to have a garden in my actual garden, but also just made me really thankful for all of the green spaces that I have that allow me to feel in nature, even though we're in a relatively busy town city. Ben and I also did go to the Monet exhibition in York, which was the Lily Pond, and it was a really brilliant exhibition, kind of giving context to Monet as a writer and kind of how he ended up creating the Lily Pond. I know that saying Monet is one of my favourite painters feels a bit basic, but he really is. And I think when Ben and I were on our honeymoon, when we went to Paris, we went to the Musée de l'Orangerie and we saw the elliptical rooms that Monet had created for his water lilies paintings, and you see them throughout the movement of the day and the seasons, and there was nothing so moving as seeing those paintings and walking around in silence and seeing these ginormous paintings of water lilies. And so I just really loved Monet, and the way that York had done it was that you had all the context of Monet as an artist and his inspiration, and then you went outside into York, and so the art galleries had frames where you would kind of look, and they had created the flowers and the gardens to mimic some of his paintings, to kind of almost put Monet in the context of a real life place as well, and kind of what he was looking at and how he turned it into art, and how that the beauty of everyday life is also art. And it was just a really beautiful framing device, I think, that the art gallery had done, that I just thought was really clever and also engages more people with art and makes it a bit more accessible as well. But that was another one of my favourites in this kind of last couple of months. The other thing I always wanted to discuss in this video was just children's literature, because you may have noticed in my last video that I did, I also spoke about wanting to read a piece of classics children's literature, which is Anne of Green Gables, and I have decided to read this when I'm in Canada, but it has just kind of children's literature has just kept popping up because I keep seeing it in different people's videos and recommending it, and I'm just realising how little like books I actually read as a child. And so, well, I did read a lot of books as a child, but they were mainly about the Tudors, the Blitz, the Titanic. It was mainly non-fiction. When I look back at all of my reading that I did as a young kid, I had, you know, classic books like Judith Kerr, The Tiger Who Came to Tea, and books like that. But then I really went from that to reading the My Story books, which were like fictionalised historical diaries, and reading non-fiction, to reading adult books. Like, I just didn't really explore any of the children's literature. So things like Little Women I read as an adult. Black Beauty I also read when I was kind of nearing adulthood as well. And so I just got so many gaps in my knowledge that I would like to kind of fill up a little bit, because I feel like whenever people talk about their favourite books, there's always a children's classic in there, and I'm missing something. So as always, when I'm looking for book recommendations, I always come to you, and I would love to hear what your favourite children's classics are, either that you read as children or that you just go read as an adult, because obviously that's what I'm going to be doing. I am really interested in reading The Railway Children because I loved that film as a little girl, and also other books like Ballet Shoes as well, because I remember watching, I think, a mini-series and enjoyed that. But I do feel like there is a kind of a gap of my knowledge, but I also have recently read a children's classic, and this has kind of been a shift for me. I think this is more like children's YA, kind of before YA was a thing, and I think it changed my perspective completely because it's become one of my top reads of the year. And I read it just before we moved, or actually within the first kind of weeks of us living here, and I haven't talked to you about it. But this book was recommended by so many of you, and so I'm glad to say that I finally read it. And that book is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I fell in love with this book from the first page. I loved the characters, I loved the bohemian kind of elements to it. I fell in love with just the writing style, but it wasn't until the end when I realised just how clever this book was, in the way that this is all from the perspective of Cassandra, because she's documenting her family life, she's writing the book, she's literally sitting in her kitchen sink writing, and it wasn't until the end when I realised how unreliable as a narrator she is, that maybe this whole novel that I've been reading has been leading me down the garden path. Like, I mean, completely, can I trust her? Like, is she actually telling me the truth? Is she showing me her version of the truth? Was actually what her father writing nonsense? The whole thing was just, I found really clever, and it was also just a really funny read as well, and I wasn't expecting it to find it as funny and to find it as lovable as it was, and I think I would have loved reading this as a child or as a teenager, but I'm really glad I read it as an adult, because I was kind of sitting there wanting to kind of annotate it and tear it apart, which is always a sign of a good book for me. I'm wondering if one of the reasons I really liked I Capture the Castle was because I kind of see myself as a young girl in Cassandra, in the kind of precociousness that she has, and when I was reading it, her kind of references to other pieces of literature, and always kind of wanting to compare her life to something great and to make something great of her life too, to kind of repair this crumbling castle, to find out the history of it, to have big hopes and dreams, and kind of with her sister Rose and stepmother Topaz, and also actually the whole novel itself and the situation they're in is also really sad, and kind of what they do to kind of find hope in and joy in things, but also to acknowledge also just how rubbish things are at certain points in the book as well. And I just think it was a really beautiful portrayal of family life in all its complexity and humour and difficulty. But it was just such an enjoyable read, and it's one that I think I would definitely come back to, and it's also a book that I really would love to study a bit as well, and kind of spend time in thinking about how actually when I finish the book, how differently I would view Cassandra, having remembered that in fact Cassandra is writing the entire thing, and therefore it's her perspective, and what is actually told to us and kept out, and which parts she chooses to share, especially at the end, and chooses not to. It just was fascinating. The whole book just feels so nostalgic and is kind of eccentric in a way that it's the structure of it also really just it's really clever. So even like the end, slam the book shut. It's almost like a Shandy-esque kind of way of directing someone to engage in your book, which I thought was really clever. And then you've got the shilling book, and then at the beginning she's like, I have a new exercise book, the finest I ever saw. It cost me a whole shilling. And it's like, just the way it's structured is so clever. When he gave it to me, I thought I would write something like Wuthering Heights in it. I never dreamt that I should want to go on with this journal, and now life has begun all over again. In fact, even just sitting with the book now is making me remember how much I loved it, just purely for its descriptions of nature and spring. I am up on Belmont. Spring has come with such a bound that catkins are still dangling on the hazels, while daisies are rushing out on the mound. I particularly love them in the short, brilliant grass of the motte, where they look like spring in a child's picture book, as well as the real spring. That's Freya. There are daffodils down in the courtyard garden, but I can't see them from here because the washing is flapping. I mean, you're there. I love it. The descriptions of nature, the characterisation, the whole book is just a joy to read, and I'm really glad that I picked this up, mainly from the many recommendations I've seen on Miranda Mills' channel, but I think so many people have just said it's a favourite book, and it is so well deserving of that praise, so I can't recommend it enough. So they're two of my recent reads, and I definitely have done a really good job this year, I think, of pairing my reading with the seasons, which is always what I love to do, but I often only really get into the flow of that in the autumn and winter when I read my gothic kind of books, but actually to read books that are so summery and spring-like was really joyful. As I said in my last video, I just haven't been reading a huge amount since the move, but I am reminding myself that it is quality over quantity, and actually the books I have read, you know, like I Captured the Castle, I finished in York, or technically actually on the train to London. That is another thing I should say, is that I'm going to London kind of every other week at the moment, and so I'm doing a lot more travelling than I ever would do, and so I'm using the time travelling, reading or listening to audiobooks, which has been really beneficial. But I am now getting into a flow of things, and I am starting to want to read more. And I think that is also, whenever you have a really good reading experience and really enjoy what you're reading, I'm often then really excited to start the next book. And it is also nice to kind of take a few books off that have been on my TBR for a long time, or kind of books always on my radar, like The Secret Garden and also I Captured the Castle, which has been a bit more of a recent discovery for me, but I feel like I'm really glad I read it, because I could have gone my life without reading it for whatever reason, because I was stubborn about reading children's literature. The other day I was just thinking about how sad it would have been if I'd have just lived my life and never read I Captured the Castle. Like, sometimes I get stuck into thinking about that, because there are so many books that I don't read because I have existing notions of like what the book is, or what it's about, or what type of book it is. And with children's literature, just weirdly snobbish, because I was a child, and when I was a little girl I didn't want to read children's books, I wanted to read adult books. I prided myself on reading adult books and not reading books that children were reading, which is really silly, but I brought that into adulthood as well. And it's not even an idea that I felt like I was better than anyone. It never came from that idea, it just came from wanting to be involved in adult conversations. It's probably because I was an only child. It feels like a very only child thing to have obsessed over, and I wanted to read the classics that were the favourite books that adults around me had. But if I had lived my life without reading I Captured the Castle, my life would just be way less special, I think. But anyway, it's just reminding me to assess when I have notions about books that I haven't read and where my ideas come from, just to always challenge my perceptions of things, because I, like Cassandra, and am also an unreliable narrator. Now I feel like you're a little bit more caught up with what I've been doing, what I've been reading. I thought I'd talk to you about what I'm currently reading, and just about to finish actually, which is Crown of Blood, The Deadly Inheritance of Lady Jane Grey by Nicola Tallis, and I love this book. There isn't actually a huge amount of writing on Lady Jane Grey, which I always find really interesting, because she is one of those kind of like iconic female figures in history. But I think the reason we don't always have a huge amount of writing on her is because I think everyone thinks they know their story. And what Nicola Tallis does so well in this book is break down a lot of the myths that we've made around Jane as this victim, and also just putting her in the perspective of a woman who was incredibly intelligent, really interested in religious reform, and just really kind of gives her back her voice in a way, and just changes how we view her family differently, and view kind of the setup around her as well. Of course, her life and her short reign is tragic. You can't get around that fact, and the fact that she was intellectual does not take away from the fact that she was killed. But it does sometimes, think, when we kind of brand victim, especially looking back at history, especially with women, we kind of silence them, and we kind of take away their humanity from a teenager who was very stubborn and willful, and was really passionate about her subjects, and was a really interesting figure in history and within her family dynamic too. And I think Nicola Tallis really brings that life back to Lady Jane Grey. So I am nearly finished it, but I cannot recommend it enough if you, like me, are a Tudor geek. The book itself has also made me realise that how much her iconography, the paintings we have of Lady Jane Grey, especially after her death, like this one, which is in the National Gallery, which is massive and is one of my favourite paintings, that literally presents her as this kind of virginal lamb going to slaughter, and the way we think of her, especially from a very Victorian angle as well, because that's a 19th century painting, how much we have almost refashioned history to promote certain morals and ideals. It's just fascinating, and Lady Jane Grey has definitely been a victim of a Victorian understanding of history, and yeah, so it's really given me like a lot of thought, and has made me question about how we view women in history in particular, but also for a woman actually that we don't know a huge amount. It's kind of really lovely to know more about her. So that is what I'm currently reading. I'm getting myself ready for a bit of a Tudor obsession moment as well, because I'm going to be going to the 6 Lives exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery for my birthday, and I'm excited to treat myself to lots of Tudor books and Tudor things there, but also I think the next book that I want to read, I think I'm going to finally read The Mirror and the Light, but I have made many videos about how I'm about to read The Mirror and the Light and then never have, because I'm not ready to say goodbye to Thomas Cromwell, and indeed say goodbye to Hilary Mantel as well. But I think after I read The Crown of Blood, I'll finish that book, and once I go to the exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery, I will definitely be in the mood to spend some time with Cromwell again. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you feel caught up with kind of what I've been reading, and I would love to catch up with you as well. So please let me know what the weather has been like, what you're currently reading, and if you don't want to do any of that and you just kind of want to do a little wave in the comments, please leave me a book emoji. But I'll see you very soon in another video.